You know, that was just 1 or 2 days that she hadn't been doing drugs in this picture. And I took her to get her hair done because I always thought if she looked good and felt good about herself, she might not do drugs.
Sandy Downing is one mom who wants to expose the rampant pill popping. Her daughter Jillian was ravaged by prescription drug abuse.
I think in some ways she felt that it made her superhuman.
I don't think she ever understood the dangers. Like my sister would say, what's the big deal? I took a pill. But one pill, it doesn't stop there.
Jillian Downing grew up in the Huguenot section of Staten Island.
She was very precocious. She loved animals, loved her family.
She was wonderful, energetic, liked things her own way, but had a very sad part to her. Her father had died when I was pregnant with Jillian, and it kind of just manifested itself that anybody that she cares about just leaves her.
From a little child, she would say, if I die, who's going to come to my funeral? Or why am I here? Asked very bizarre questions.
I took her for counseling, and she seemed better until she was 17. At 17, she had twins, premature. One died the day it was born, and one died 2 weeks later.
After the birth and death of her twins, it was almost that she gave up on herself, and she gave up on life.
Jillian, because of all of her sadness and not having good coping skills, looked for an escape. She was a big pot smoker. Then when pot no longer worked, she started to look for other drugs.
She had gone to a therapist that had prescribed Xanax.
Xanax is a central nervous system depressant generally prescribed to decrease the anxiety level of patients.
The difficulty with Xanax is that it's highly, highly addictive.
When we saw her go through a prescription in a short amount of time, we knew exactly what she was doing. And then it was all downhill from there. As far as Jillian taking the prescribed Xanax and then moving on to where it was out of control, I think that she felt that her troubles disappeared when she took them, but she'd take more and more, and it wasn't taking away what she would call her pain.
She would take 10 at a time. She'd chew them to make it work faster. She was very hostile. She was suicidal. She would threaten, take a knife, go in the bathroom, say she was going to kill herself. I started to find diaries that she was keeping where she wrote that she's a drug user and she doesn't know what to do about it. I don't know how many kids take pictures of themselves when they're stoned, but she did all the time. And I felt helpless to help her.
Jillian tried to quit cold turkey, but her efforts backfired.
The medication, if taken away abruptly, can lead to seizures that can be very dangerous, even life-threatening.
She would have seizures, and then she'd go back on the Xanax. And she never took her seizure medicine, so it was just a vicious cycle.
Sandy was always trying to get her into a rehab, and at that age, if they don't want to sign themselves in, you have no control over that. There was no way to get her in forcefully.
By her 24th birthday, Jillian was experimenting with a medley of chemicals on top of the Xanax.
She probably didn't even know half the things that she was swallowing. She was doing prescription drugs as hardcore as people were doing street drugs.
I didn't believe in throwing my child out, but she was so bad in 2007 that I told her she just couldn't live there any longer. And she was missing for 2 days.
Jillian ended up in the ER. Paramedics found her on a street corner after she overdosed on a lethal mix of Xanax and prescription painkillers.
She was in the hospital for 2 days, and after 2 days, she was discharged.
5 months later, Jillian overdosed again.
She came home and she didn't look right. And all of a sudden she started to make these horrendous noises, which I've learned is when you start to die.
My next door neighbor, CPR, and he revived her. She was in the emergency room probably 2 or 3 days, and then after that they put her in a program, mandated, but she was only in there for a couple of days and then she was out.
In March 2008, Jillian OD'd for the 3rd time in 8 months.
I was never so frightened in my life, and I called 911, and they told me that I had to get her to the floor so that I could do CPR on her. The EMTs kept working on her, and she finally came to.
Jillian was ultimately sent to a psychiatric facility where she received intensive counseling for 2 weeks.
She went through a small stage of everything was going to change.
She had a new boyfriend, had hopes, dreams, had a new job, had a different outlook.
And I thought that there was like a glimmer of hope.
But Jillian couldn't stay off pills long enough to jumpstart her life. After nearly 6 years abusing prescription drugs, her body gave out.
On August 23rd at 4 o'clock in the morning, Jillian's boyfriend called me, and he was hysterical, and he told me that he had called 911 that she had choked on a bagel, or so he thought. When I got to the hospital, her eyes were open and she was on a respirator, but I knew she was gone.
We sat in the hospital for the next 4 days, but there was no signs, and she just wasn't there anymore.
I couldn't stay when they took her off the respirator. And that was the end. The medical examiner's office said that my daughter died from an enlarged heart, and Xanax was in her system. All the times that she OD'd and her heart stopped and they restarted it is what ultimately killed her.
She was 25 years old and had a lifetime that we could have spent together. Why didn't she listen to us? Why didn't she get help? She had so much going for her. But the drugs were more important than her own family.
I'm just now to the point where I don't cry every day. But I miss her terribly.